So imagine you're walking down the street, right? Everyone's glued to their phones. It's kind of wild when you think about it, like these devices are everywhere. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens to all these gadgets when we're done with them?
Yeah, it's easy to forget about the physical side of our digital lives.
Totally. And that's what we're diving deep into today. E-waste. We're checking out some really eye-opening insights from Sivani Saravanamuttu and her work on Project Plain Talk, specifically her segment, Mission Green.
Right, and she makes a really important point right off the bat that these devices, they connect us digitally, for sure, but their physical journey from creation to disposal, that's got some serious real-world consequences.
And she doesn't shy away from the numbers. Did you know that something like 1.4 billion cell phones are produced every year? It's mind-boggling.
It's a staggering number, and what's even crazier is that the average lifespan of a phone is only like, what, 3.5 years?
It's crazy how quickly we go through these things. I know I've definitely swapped out phones faster than that.
Oh, for sure. And all of this constant churn of devices, it leads to these massive amounts of e-waste. And that's where the environmental impact really comes into play.
Right, it's not just about landfills overflowing with old phones. Sivani talks about how the toxic materials in these devices, they can leach into the groundwater and pollute the atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's a problem that affects all of us.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even small actions, seemingly insignificant ones like upgrading your phone, they can have these ripple effects throughout the ecosystem.
And get this, using your cell phone for just 1 hour a day, that generates over a year 1.25 tons of CO2 emissions.
Wow.
That's equivalent to 2 round-trip flights from London to Glasgow.
It's easy to forget about the energy it takes to power all those Google searches and, those endless TikTok scrolls.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Data centers consume a huge amount of electricity, often coming from fossil fuels, and that all contributes to those CO2 emissions.
So we've established that our gadgets have a much bigger carbon footprint than we might realize. But it gets even wilder when we start looking at what's actually inside these sleek little devices. Sivani talks about this study where scientists basically put a phone in a blender
I've heard about this, yeah.
to analyze its components.
It's a pretty unusual method, to say the least.
Right. And they found 33 grams of iron, 7 grams of chromium, 90 milligrams of silver, and get this, 36 milligrams of gold.
Wow.
All in that tiny device.
There's a gold mine in your pocket.
Right. And it's not just gold. There's copper, there's platinum, all these valuable materials. And Sivani uses this to bring up this idea of a circular economy, where we treat these resources as valuable and try to keep them in use for as long as possible.
Right. It's a total shift from our current linear take, make, dispose model.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, imagine a system where we design these devices from the get-go to be taken apart, and their parts could be easily recycled or even better, reused. That's the beauty of a circular economy.
Seriously. It's a whole new way of thinking about our gadgets.
Yeah.
But getting back to our phones, Sivani talks about, the journey they take from mines in South America, Asia, Africa, to factories, mainly in China.
Right.
It's kind of crazy to think about all those resources, the energy, the people involved, just so we can have these little devices in our pockets.
Yeah, and that whole journey, it often comes with, well, let's say, hidden costs, especially in places where labor and environmental laws aren't so strict. Mining those valuable materials can be really tough on the environment and the people living there.
Right. Savani really emphasizes that this isn't just an environmental issue, it's also a social justice issue, like when she talks about conflict minerals.
Right, like cobalt and tantalum, essential for batteries and circuitry in our phones. And unfortunately, they often come from conflict zones.
And the demand for those minerals can actually end up fueling violence and exploitation in those areas. It's a lot to think about, honestly.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've covered the problem, all that e-waste, the impact on the environment, the human cost. But what can we actually do about it? Thankfully, Sivani gives us some answers. One thing she stresses is the need to move beyond just throwing things in the trash.
Absolutely. Tossing our old devices in the bin is the worst thing we can do. Recycling is crucial, and exploring other options too, like refurbishing devices, giving them to people who need them but might not be able to afford the newest thing.
Right. Give those gadgets a second life. She's really into refurbished phones, and I get it. It's a win-win. Consumers save some money, get a perfectly good phone, and those devices stay out of landfills.
Exactly.
But Sivani also kind of challenges us to rethink this whole upgrade culture. you know?
Oh, yeah.
Like, do we really need the newest phone every year or two? Why can't phones be built to last longer, like a fridge or a car?
It's a really good question. The tech industry has definitely conditioned us to always want the latest and greatest, but there's a growing movement towards electronics that lasts longer and can be repaired. Imagine you could just swap out your phone's battery or upgrade a part instead of buying a whole new phone.
Right. That would be amazing. Talk about reducing e-waste. It's pretty cool to think about the possibilities.
Yeah.
And speaking of cool things, Sivani talks about some awesome innovations happening in this field.
Yeah, there's some brilliant people out there working on solutions. Everything from better batteries to incredible new recycling technologies.
Like what? Tell me there's some good news.
Well, one really interesting development is solid-state batteries. They're different from the lithium-ion batteries we have now, which, let's be honest, can be a little fragile. You know, we've all heard those stories about exploding phones, right?
Yeah.
Solid-state batteries are different. They use solid electrolytes, which makes them safer, they last longer, and they could be a game changer for storing renewable energy, too.
Now that is cool. What about those protein-based sensors? Sivani mentioned them, and they sound like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Right. So these sensors, they're designed to find and recover those rare earth metals from e-waste. Like little magnets, attracting and grabbing onto those valuable metals so we can use them again. It's a way more sustainable option than how we usually recycle.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Innovation for the win. See? It's not all doom and gloom.
Definitely not. But even though all this technology is promising, we can't just sit back and rely on it. What we do as individuals, it really matters.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What can we do in our everyday lives to make a difference? Give us the action plan.
All right, well, first things first, let's talk about those old phones we all have lying around. You know, the ones hiding in drawers. Before you even think about tossing them out, make sure you've backed up all your data and then do a factory reset.
Yeah, got to protect that data. But okay, once that's done, what's the best way to actually get rid of old devices?
Recycling, for sure. See if there are any electronics recycling programs in your area. Or check if any stores have those drop-off bins for e-waste. And remember those batteries we were talking about? They usually need to be recycled separately, so look out for those battery recycling options.
Got it. Recycle those devices and batteries the right way. Okay, but thinking bigger picture now, I keep coming back to what Sivani said about conscious consumption. It really makes you stop and think.
Totally. It's so easy to get caught up in the whole upgrade cycle that we forget to even question it. Like, do we really need that brand new phone just because it has a slightly better camera? Or are we just falling for those marketing tricks?
It's true. Those ads are good at what they do. Maybe we all need to take a breath before we hit that buy button. What else can we do, though, to be more mindful consumers?
Well, think about how long you can actually make your devices last. A good phone case can work wonders. And if it's just a minor repair, maybe try fixing it instead of getting a whole new one. And hey, when you really do need to upgrade, consider buying refurbished. You'd be surprised how good those can be. And you save money and reduce waste all at the same time.
Such a good point. Okay, so we've covered what we can do as individuals, but what about the companies that are making these gadgets? What's their responsibility in all of this?
Oh, they've got a huge role to play. Sivani talks about how important it is to support companies that are, actually trying to do the right thing. The ones that are upfront about where they get their materials, how they treat their workers, and what their impact on the environment is.
So basically, doing our homework before we buy something, finding out which companies are walking the talk when it comes to sustainability and ethics.
Exactly. It's about making sure that our purchases actually match up with our values. Every time we buy something, we're kind of voting for the kind of world we want to live in.
That's a powerful way to think about it. We've covered so much ground today. It's a lot to take in, this whole e-waste problem, but then also all the cool solutions coming out. It's easy to feel overwhelmed. But I think Sivani's message is ultimately a hopeful one. We're not powerless in all of this. We have the power to make a difference through the choices we make, the actions we take.
100%. And it's not just about what we do on our own. It's about speaking up, demanding better from those companies that make the technology we depend on every day.
I love that. So as we wrap things up here, I want to leave you with something to think about. We live in a world that's more and more reliant on technology. So the big question is, how do we balance that love of innovation, that excitement for the newest thing, with our responsibility to the planet, to each other? It's a question worth asking ourselves every time we pick up our smartphones. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of e-waste and the circular economy. Until next time, let's all try to make tech choices that are good for us and good for the planet.